today, we naturally are interested in seeing how the future of Israel, at least in the coming months. At this point, we measure the Israeli government's longevity in months, though there is always a chance for change and improvement. So, all right, let me just say that we are all awaiting anxiously the results of this, the fourth round in the elections determining Israel's political leadership. And we are fortunate to have you, the representatives of Meretz, Hatikva Hadasha, which to many people is exactly that, namely a new hope for Israel. We'll hear more about it from Ambassador Dani Dayan and from Rabbi Gilad Kariv.
So I will briefly describe myself, mine and my party's opinions and positions regarding, first of all, state and religion, and the other issue is the dialogue, let's say, or the relationship between Israel and diaspora Jews and the Jewish communities around the world. So, as you know, I'm representing Meretz, which is a small, progressive, left-wing party. I think it's small in Israel, but I think that if the elections were held among the Jewish communities around the world, maybe Meretz would have been much bigger, especially in North America. And our position regarding state and religion is derived from our position regarding the rainbow of our politics. We are a liberal, progressive, human rights supporting party, and therefore we support separation of state and religion. And we actually think that the fact that the state of Israel, that was founded as the national home for the Jewish people by the Zionist movement, that my grandparents came here, they emigrated to Israel before the war in the 30s, and they learned Hebrew in Europe because they longed and they hoped and they were eager to come to Israel and work in agriculture and build this country. They never thought that Israel would have a orthodox or halacha nature. They were, by the way, Mizrahi Jews supporters. They were definitely religious in their nature, in their character of their family. But the Zionist movement started Israel as a democratic country where everybody have equal rights. And everybody, that means, of course, Jews and Arabs. That also means men and women. That means that Israel would be a democracy like the family of democracies around the world. My grandmother was a feminist. She was a member of the Labour Party, by the way. She was an activist. And she never imagined that Israel would discriminate so much against in the Jewish Orthodox nature. And actually, the fact that in Israel the key to determine questions like marriage, like divorce, like conversion, like Shabbat and many other issues was given to an Orthodox monopoly, to our opinion, the Meretz opinion, is actually a deviation of what was meant to be in the beginning of this country. Therefore, we support separation of state and religion. We support civil marriage and divorce. Actually, I think that the fact that Israel, as the homeland of the Jewish people, is the only country in the world, maybe besides Iran, that religious law controls the issues like personal law, that buses don't run on Shabbat, and people who don't, who are not religious, are not able to travel, visit family, go to the beach. This is a wrongdoing that we believe that should be fixed. In the same manner, we see the relationship between the Jewish community or the state of Israel and the Jewish communities around the world. Israel was founded as I said, the homeland for the Jewish people. That means, I think, maybe the best manifestation of that is the law of return that actually welcomes every Jewish man or woman or family around the world to come to Israel, make Aliyah, and find their home here. But in the same time, it keeps a warm connection between the state of Israel and the Jewish people who choose not to do so. But the idea of homeland is not only to become a citizen and vote in elections, and even not only donate money to the various causes here. It also means that there is actually a special and warm connection in the feelings and in the thoughts and minds and dreams and hopes and prayers of millions of Jews around the world who don't live in Israel. And I think this is actually what makes the idea of the homeland of the Jewish people so special. So I think we could see that tension or that ideas in the question of the Kotel just recently. I was among those who went to prayer with the women of the wall, even though I'm secular and I don't pray in my everyday life. But for me, that was an act of solidarity of the feminism and the Jewish pluralism that the women of the wall represent. And I regret deeply that Israel canceled the Kotel plan that was that was planned together with the reform and conservative movements in Israel that represent many of the Jewish communities around the world, in the pressure of ultra-Orthodox rabbis and unfortunately also right-wing politicians from the government. I think that in the past, for decades, what I just described was not a partisan issue in Israel. It was an Israeli issue with the Jewish communities. But recently, in the last few years, it has become also a political question in Israel that divides left and right. And unfortunately, the right-wing governments, especially Likud, seem to dismiss and look up on those strong connections that I think should stay strong even in that atmosphere. And Meretz is a Jewish pluralism supporter, is a human rights supporter, and therefore it is also support those values that are very important to many of our friends and brothers and sisters around the world.
All right, thank you. So, Tamal, you've been a long-time partner and supporter of our shared values. And I remember, for instance, working with you on the issue of public transportation on Shabbat and the issues of freedom of marriage, etc. So wonderful to have you with us today. Rabbi Shalom Schachter is asking, many in Chutz La'aretz are also interested in policies that will strengthen democracy and increase social and economic justice. Does Meretz have any policies in these areas that will attract a greater degree of support from Israeli voters? Obviously, that's the question that you ask yourselves, but do you have any short answer to offer, Rabbi Schachter?
Definitely. Let me separate, for the sake of the answer, between policies and the political strategy to attract voters. The policies, of course, Meretz is the party that supports justice, peace, and democracy. Meretz has a long time support for, and that is actually strengthening now under coronavirus for social economic just policy that will increase quality and diminish the social gaps between different populations. We see now how much it is needed under the economic crisis of coronavirus. For example, I don't know if you know that women are 70% of the people being laid off from their jobs in Israel under the third lockdown that we're just now starting to get out of. Family domestic violence is in record numbers, and I think that generally speaking, many countries around the world are now kind of revealing or again are under the impression of how social democratic economic policy is needed, because a strong government with strong social services is the only one that can deal with the crisis in that magnitude, rather than the free market that many countries, including Israel under the right wing years, always taught us that maybe we'll just give the free market to go and everything will be fine. Now we see that especially in times of crisis, this is not the case, and many countries around the world are heavily compensate and stream money to help the economy boost. And of course, in the field of democracy, this is one of the main issues that Meretz is and also seeing in the holistic context. You probably know that we are under a very severe democratic crisis with a prime minister under 3 severe corruption indictments. But for us, democracy is also making peace and ending the military control over the Palestinian people and achieving a 2-state solution. And democracy is also separating state and religion and freeing many women from their rabbinical control over marriage, divorce, and other discriminatory institutions. So this is all part of our agenda. We always try to use our policies to withdraw more support. Not always it is successful, but we are very proud in being a very strong ideological and very clear voice for our values. And we see that sometimes it makes us more successful in implementing many of our policies than many other parties who compromise or cooperate with the right-wing governments and end up disappearing from the political map. So we take pride in our positions and policies.
The question of whether Meretz is going to be impacting the next government, I think, is more uncertain than the next speaker. So Dani Dayan is probably one of the most, I think, potentially important. He and the New Hope and Hatikva Hadasha in terms of whether the political landscape of Israel is going to change. He'll probably speak to what New Hope stands for better than I can, but I think it's fair to say that in terms of the leader of the New Hope, Gideon Sa'ar, for many years associated with the Likud, he has gotten the closest than any other candidate to challenging Bibi Netanyahu in terms of personal qualifications and desirability in the eyes of the public to replace Bibi Netanyahu. And Dani Dayan himself, as I said before, was quite unique in terms of both his political background, his and the impact that he made during his tenure as the Consul General of Israel in New York. I am looking forward, because I've been reading everything that has been written about Sa'ar's positions on issues of religion and state, and I know your particular commitment to diaspora Jewry, to world Jewry. I'm eagerly awaiting to hear from you. The three questions that we ask our participants are: what is your specific position, and what will you be pursuing if you are part of the next government in terms of the major religion and state issues? To what extent do you see the Israeli government having to take into consideration diaspora Jewish views on matters that impact on them? And if you are going to be impacting the next government, what are the three main areas in which you feel your party will want to and attempt to make an impact? Go ahead, Dani.
Thank you so much, Regev. I am really glad to be here. It's a kind of deja vu to be again with a mostly North American audience speaking in English. When I came to New York, I made a point in having a dialogue, but not just a dialogue, a candid, a sincere and open dialogue, without hiding the differences of opinion, with the largest possible extent of the Jewish community. Actually, my first two events as Consul General, and I must say I'm not a career diplomat, I was a political appointment, so those were my first days as a diplomat in my life. One of the first things that I did was two consecutive breakfasts in my residence. The first one with conservative and reform rabbis, and the second one with liberal Jewish activists. Why did I do that? Because I needed to fill that gap. I was much more familiar with the other side of the aisle, as I didn't say that, I was for 6 years the chairman of the Yesha Council, which is the Council of Jewish Communities in Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank settlements. I reside in a community in central Samaria, and I don't hide that point. People ask me, how come that you were the leader of the settlers for 6 years and you had such a wonderful relationship, to the point that Anat Hoffman calls me the darling of the women of the world? And the answer is very simple. I am, and I believe my colleagues at New Hope are, staunch liberals. We don't have to agree to respect your views, to respect your rights, not only your views. I believe that rights are rights, even if I need those rights or not, and that from that belief stem my position, for instance, in the issue of the Kotel. I ask myself frequently if there is a mitzvah, an obligation that is particular to our contemporary Jewish generation. I will explain what I mean. For instance, there was a Jewish generation that had the extra mitzvah to try to save, both in Israel and in America, to try to save the European Jewry from extermination. That generation failed. Probably it was impossible to succeed. I'm not judging, just describing. Then there was a Jewish generation that had the extra mitzvah to try to free Ethiopian Jewry, to bring home the Ethiopian Jewry. Thank God that generation succeeded. What about us? And I believe that we don't have such a clear mitzvah, but I believe that we have two. As Jews, we have the mitzvah of guaranteeing the existence of Israel, but not just the existence of the robust, secure, thriving state, Jewish state, and the second is to guarantee the continuity of Jewish life elsewhere. And I believe today that it will be a tragedy if there is no cross responsibility, if each large Jewish community, Israelis and Americans, each one sees itself as responsible for only one of them. We Israelis see ourselves as responsible for Israel and not for our brothers across the sea, and vice versa. American Jews see themselves as responsible for their Jewish life and not for Israel. And that is what drives me to prevent that tragedy of parallel responsibilities instead of a joint responsibility. So that definitely drives my life today, and also, I believe, my colleagues. That is probably the most important issue I intend to deal with in the future if I am elected to the Knesset. Finally, I would say a word about, I will not evade the hot potato of state and religion in Israel. As I said, I am personally a liberal. I believe personally in civil marriage in Israel, for sure, freedom of worship in the Kotel, etc., etc. But I am part of a party today, and we are in the midst of deliberations on this issue. I can assure you that Tikva Hadasha, New Hope, will under no circumstances be supportive of any form of religious coercion in Israel. But we are realistic, and we understand that what we need, we believe that what we need today is not to deal with each issue separately. The issue of the Kotel and the issue of the Giur and the issue of public transportation, of the issue of marriage and the issue of other Giur, etc., etc. What we propose today is as part of the process of healing that actually we formed as a country to promote the process of healing in the Israeli society that is divided and polarized. And divided and polarized because there are those that are interested in dividing and polarizing it because they gain political power from that. So as a part of that process of healing that we propose for the state of Israel, for the Israeli society, between religious and secular, between Jews and Arabs, between rich and poor, etc., etc., is a new covenant between the more religious and the less religious, between the Orthodox, the liberal denominations, and the secular in Israel. We believe that the status quo, the famous or probably infamous status quo that was crafted by Ben Gurion and the Chazon Ish back in the 50s is obsolete these days, and it is bad for the Israeli society. And we, along the lines of the Gabizon Medan Charter or Covenant, designed by the late eminent jurist Professor Ruth Gavizon and Ibadel Chaim Alokim Rabbi Yaakov Medan, we believe that we have to, difficult as it is, to craft a new live and let live a formula for the Israeli society that will cover all aspects of a modern Jewish and democratic state. I must, as I said, I definitely are in the liberal wing of my party, but I don't see strong differences in that aspect. All the deliberations I had with my colleagues, including the head of our party, Gideon Sa'ar, I think everyone understands that the current situation is non-sustainable. The fact that people cannot get married in Israel is non-sustainable. that certain persons cannot get married in Israel, cannot marry in Israel is unsustainable. And we have, the question is only how and not if.
I did not mention that you were the head of the Yesha Council, which of course is something that not only are you not hiding, but you are proud of it, and
Definitely
one of the most coherent and compelling speakers of the political right. By
the way, I don't use the word right to describe myself.
Yeah, well, okay.
But I know that's the conventional denomination. I don't like it. But by the way, in not using the word right, I am going in the footsteps of Menachem Begin.
So having mentioned Menachem Begin, I just want to press you on a couple of additional things.
Sure.
One was raised by a few people now on the chat, and that has to do with the issue of the Ugandan Jews and the conservative conversions that many of them have undergone. That is now held up by the Ministry of the Interior, the Population Registry. What's your position? What do you think New Hope will do about it if they can make a difference? And of course, Gideon Saar was the Minister of the Interior. The second question had to do with equality for all Israelis. Can you say something about this notion of equality, which was left out of the nation-state law, equality for Israeli Arabs, whether Muslim, Christian, and others? And the last question is, the group here are Israel lovers and enthusiastic about bonding with Israel, sharing a vision of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. Israel will not truly be a Jewish and democratic state so long as the ultra-Orthodox parties are able to dictate their demands, and most Israeli governments have buckled and accepted their demands. To the extent that you can establish a coalition that doesn't depend on the Haredi parties, to what extent do you see, not just talk about the new covenant, but are there specific areas in which you will fight to change?
Okay, so 3 questions. The first one about the Ugandan Jews. I must admit that I am not aware of all the details. I know that I regret the decision by Minister Deri not to recognize. I think that it was even the wrong decision regarding, even according to the existing parameters in which a conversion done in an established or recognized community, whatever kind of a conversion should be recognized. I was disappointed that this one was not recognized. By the way, I mentioned the Gabizon Medan covenant or charter or agreement. In that agreement, they talk about, even in the law of return, talking about not Jews, but members of the Jewish people. A member of the Jewish people is definitely not is a less halachic, even in the eyes of the ultra-Orthodox, and the Orthodox is a less halachic definition. By the way, I personally have my private definition of who is a Jew. My private, I'm saying it half jokingly, but also half seriously. My definition of who is a Jew is a person that every October, when the winner, the awardees of the Nobel Prizes are announced in Stockholm and in Oslo, the first thing he looks at how many Jews are there in the list. If you do that, you are either a Jew or an anti-Semite. And if I am elected to the Knesset, I definitely will look into that matter and try to help. I visited some communities in other places in the world in which similar situations existed, in Iquitos in Peru and other places, and I was very moved, very touched by that. Now, regarding the nation-state law, I and our party with one exception, Benny Begin, the son of Menachem Begin, that is a candidate also in our party, are supportive of the law. We don't think that that law discriminates in any way non-Jewish citizens in Israel. It talks about the definition of the state as a Jewish state, but in no way discriminates others. That being said, I believe that a clause of equality is lacking in the Israeli quasi-constitution, that is the basic clause. However, I don't believe that it belongs necessarily or specifically to the nation-state law, but a specific law that makes clear that all citizens are equal should be legislated and have the status of a basic law. No doubt that that is the way that we expect the government of Israel to act, even when there is no such explicit clause, but we believe that an explicit clause guaranteeing equality for all Israeli citizens should be legislated. I said that I go in the footsteps of Menachem Begin, but even more than that, my ideological mentor is Zev Jabotinsky, the Zionist leader that incidentally passed away in New York in 1940. And when Zev Jabotinsky wrote in one of his poems, he was also a poet, that in our land, the son of Nazareth and the son of Arabia and my son will thrive under our blue and white flag. That is exactly what I believe. Now, regarding Haredim in the coalition, look, we formed our party with the explicit and not only explicit, but imperative intention to replace Prime Minister Netanyahu. We said that totally clear. We will not sit in a coalition led by Prime Minister Netanyahu. And that is not because we have huge ideological differences regarding Judea and Samaria or regarding Iran and other issues. It is because we believe that the way that Prime Minister Netanyahu, the discourse the way that he imposed this on Israel, the divisive, in some cases inciting discourse, this is very reminiscent of another leader that you know very well. In some senses, is dangerous for the state of Israel, is dangerous for the cohesion of the Israeli society, is dangerous for the future of Israel, and also the mismanagement that we are seeing these days regarding COVID and other issues, and preferring personal and partisan considerations to the interests of the state we cannot accept that. So we will not be a part of Netanyahu coalition. I believe that Sar is the only one that has a real chance of replacing Netanyahu, because like it or not, the replacement of Netanyahu will come from the center right and not from the center left. And therefore, we believe that after the election, there is a good chance. It's not sure. We have to work hard in order to make that happen. There is a strong chance that we will have several options for a coalition. That means that if we have several or two options for a coalition, we are a completely different situation than Mr. Netanyahu. Mr. Netanyahu has no political alternative but to obey the ultra-Orthodox, to give to all their demands. So I will not say that we will form a coalition in which the ultra-Orthodox parties will not be a part of. That is a strong possibility, but I cannot assure you of that. But no doubt that we will form a coalition that will not be dependent on the ultra-Orthodox. Now I want to say finally in this point, I am old enough to remember the coalition that the late Prime Minister Sharon formed with Yair Lapid's dad, Yosef Lapid. And Yosef Lapid was very outspoken against the ultra-Orthodox. And to the extent that he had achievements, they were temporary because his party disintegrated later and the ultra-Orthodox returned to power and reversed all his policies. And I asked myself many times, why did Yosef Lapid fail? Why did Yosef Lapid and his Shinui party disintegrate after an apparently successful term in government? And my answer to myself was that Lapid was more preoccupied and more busy in hurting the ultra-Orthodox than in benefiting the secular and the liberals. And for instance, he didn't install a public transportation on Shabbat, but he cut the budgets of the yeshivot. And for me, that was a lesson. The lesson is that it's more important and also more political savvy to do things for the benefit of your constituency than to just, take revenge in some respects on the other side. And I am quite convinced of that, and that's what I bring, at least with myself, to the party and to the political arena.
Thank you, Danny. It's been wonderful listening to you. I think that whereas those on this call could have expected what Tamar Zandberg had to say, I think that there is tremendous curiosity, for good reason, as to not only what you personally are saying on these issues, but what level of new hope does New Hope bring with it. The polls definitely show that there is a high likelihood of that happening. In a minute, we'll be hearing Rabbi Gilad Kariv.
My friend, Rabbi Gilad Kariv.
But I think it's probably fair to say, and Gilad will have to confront this challenge, it's fair to say that what you alluded to is so true, namely, all polls indicate that approximately 64% of Israeli Jews identify themselves as politically being right of center. And with that reality, the political likelihood of Netanyahu's coalition being replaced, it's going to be replaced by primarily alternatives from the right, as you suggested. And therefore, I think that you have brought a sort of a refreshing message and clearly an indication that whereas so many people view the situation as same old, it's just the same thing all over again. Actually, what you have told us and what the figures that we'll be covering briefly after Gilad finishes indicate that it may not be same old, and you are a major building block in potentially making it so. So thank you very much. We will surely see you in the Knesset.
Thank you. Shalom, Gilad. Mazal tov.
Shalom, Danny. Toda.
Gilad, well, Gilad is yet another welcome surprise in the, not just the dramatic setting, black on black, but a welcome surprise in the way that Israeli politics are unfolding. Gilad Kariv is the first Reform rabbi who actually is close to entering into the Knesset and bringing the voice of the values that he represents to the Knesset. There was a very active member of the Reform movement, actually former chair of the Reform movement in Israel, who was a Knesset member for the Independent Liberal Party, Nissim Eliad, but never a Reform rabbi. Some were offered and turned it down. Some weren't offered and turned it down. But Gilad not only was offered, but came second in the primaries by a large margin. So this time around, for a variety of reasons, of the challenges and crisis labor is facing, Rabbi Gilad Kariv is probably going to be in the next Knesset. So to all of us, we want to hear from you how you see labor pursuing issues of religious freedom and equality. It doesn't necessarily have a stellar record in the past in pursuing a principal position on these issues. To what extent may it actually be part of a next government coalition? And how do you see your own role in the next Knesset?
So, Shalom, good afternoon. I saw the list of the names of all the participants, so I allow myself to say Shalom Chaverim, Shalom friends. Uri, thank you for inviting me. Many of you well know that Uri is for me a colleague and a mentor. One of the Reform rabbis that was offered and refused, so to enter the Knesset, and I hope that you are right in saying that I'm close to being in a position that I can represent our values inside the Knesset. I must say that it will be a real honor for me to serve together with Tami Zandberg and Dani Dayan. I do want to share two preliminary remarks and then to address directly your questions, Uri. First, I do want to mark the fact that the Labour Party, my party, is the only Israeli party that ran democratic procedures to design its list towards the next Knesset. In spite of the very short period of time we had, immediately after Merav Michaeli, a close friend and supporter of the Reform and the conservative movements in Israel, immediately after she was elected only 3 weeks ago, she said that she declared that she insists to do primaries, and we had primaries elections with almost 20,000 voters. And I'm mentioning this fact because it's important to understand that I ran in those primaries mainly with the flag of promoting religious pluralism or religious freedom and promoting Jewish diversity. This was my main message and my main flag. And the fact that I was elected in to the second place in the primaries says something about the desire of the Labour members to see the issue of religious pluralism as a core issue to the Labour Party. And I agree with you that in the past, the Labour Party didn't always have a fine record in this arena. But I strongly believe that when you look into the records of Merav Michaeli, the new chair of the party, and the fact that I was elected upon this specific platform, I think it's a very strong signal to the commitment of the labor members to deal with those issues and to see them as central to this long process of reviving the Labor Party and the labor movement in Israel. My second remark is going beyond the borders of my own party, and I do want to mention I was not able to attend the opening or to hear your opening remarks, but I do want to say that we are heading towards very interesting elections, also in regards to the issues that we address in this webinar. And Uri already mentioned it in regards to the New Hope Party, but I ask all of us to look into the current political reality in Israel and to keep in mind that the modern Orthodox community was split, and Naftali Bennett is adding one modern Orthodox party, which is much more moderate than the other one led by Bezalel Smotrich. The Likud, as we heard, was splitted, and Gideon Saar, with people like Benny Begin and Dani Dayan, definitely present themselves as the successors of the liberal right wing camp. Blue and white is almost disappearing, and it means that Yesh Atid, led by Yair Lapid, and Israel Beiteinu, led by Avigdor Lieberman, are once again the main players in the central arena. And another interesting development, which usually we don't address seriously enough, is the split inside the Arab Israeli community. When the Islamic Party left the United Arabic Party, the Islamic Party was the internal force in this combined Arabic party that actually held a much more conservative approach towards issues of religion and state, rights of the LGBTQ community, and other issues. They had a very strong alliance with the ultra-Orthodox parties. And here also, we see that the leading political Arabic force in the Knesset will be able to hold a much more moderate and even liberal views in regard to issues of state and religion. So I really believe that we have an opportunity today, or we will have an opportunity in the next Knesset that we didn't have in the past. It doesn't mean that we will be able to fully realize this opportunity, but after a few rounds, the issue of religion and state is definitely playing a leading role in the current campaign. Now I will go back to the direct questions, and I will say the following. I think it's clear that when it comes to my personal views and political policies, you can mark all the right boxes. I have a very strong, long-standing partnership with my host and with many other colleagues in working hard from outside the Knesset, or working hard outside the Knesset to promote civil marriage and divorce, public transportation on Shabbat, full recognition in the non-Orthodox streams, civil burial services, and all the classical issues of our long-standing effort to promote religious pluralism and freedom of religion in Israel. I'm glad to say that in the last few years, and this is not my first attempt to be elected as part of the labor list, I'm glad to say that in the last 5-6 years, those positions are part of the formal platform of the Labour Party. And we succeeded to create a shift in the attitude of the Labour Party, the formal attitude of the formal policies of the Labour Party. And I must say that in the coming elections, we will have a much clearer platform in regard to issues of state and religion than parties like New Hope. And we will not hesitate to talk about all those policies that we need to change and new policies we need to adopt. I do want, in that regard, to say that I think that the last few months and the current situation in Israel around the COVID-19 challenges show us again that we cannot address only the classical issues of religion and state relations. That in Israel, the way those relations were constructed carries an enormous impact on many fields of life that are not a part of what we identify as the core issues of religion and state. The growing tension between the ultra-Orthodox community and the other sectors of the Israeli society, the lack of ability of the Israeli government to impose the restrictions, the guidelines, actually the legislation on the ultra-Orthodox institutions and community in general is only one implication of the issue of religion and state in Israel that goes beyond the classical issues that Uri, you addressed in your question. I don't have the time to respond to what Danny Dayan, our good friend, said about the nation-state law. But I think many of you will agree with me that the religious right in Israel is not only working hard against the concept of religious pluralism, it is working extremely hard against other central democratic values and mechanisms. And there is a reason why this attack against the Supreme Court, for example, is coming from the ranks of the religious right and also the ultra-Orthodox parties. And a big part of the political, communal, economic ability of those groups in Israel to launch those attacks are rooted in the fact that they are heavily funded. Their institutions, their social infrastructures, their schools, their post-school programs are all fully funded by and heavily funded by the Israeli government when the liberal communities, liberal institutions are not treated in an equal manner. And this is also something which is deeply rooted in the way religion and state relations are structured in Israel. The attacks against civil equality to the Arab minority are mainly led today not by secular right-wing politicians. They are mainly led by rabbis that get their paychecks from the Israeli government, led by educators, religious educators that are fully funded by the Israeli government. And we all need to understand that when we are talking about religion and state in Israel, yes, we are starting with the core issues of religion and state, but then we also need to include under this title the need to change the civil understanding with the ultra-Orthodox community, and it will not be done only by carrots. It must be done also with some sticks, not only sticks, but a combination of carrots and sticks. And it also has to do with the basic battle to secure the democratic values and the democratic nature of the state of Israel. I will end by saying that because you are not potential voters, I'm not going to share you or share with you promises that I cannot meet. And this is a bad political behavior anyway, regardless to the question if you can vote or not. And I'm saying it because we all understand that our ability to push forward our policies is mainly depending on the question, are we going to be a part of a government, or are we going to spend the next term in the opposition? And what is the nature of the government if we are part of it? Here I do want to echo or to second what Danny Dayan said, and I think he said it in a wise way. Even if we are not able, because of political constraints, to promote all our policies, by definition, if we are part of a government, we have the ability to strengthen those infrastructures that will enable the pluralistic liberal community in Israel, including the non-Orthodox streams, to gain more and more public strength, to gain more and more recognition, to gain more and more political standing. And in that regard, there is a long list of extremely practical things that should be done in order to promote equality to the streams, in order to enable pluralistic Jewish studies in the public schools, in order to build our capacity in Israel. And even if we will not have the political ability, for example, to legislate civil marriage and divorce, and I do hope we will have it, but even if we don't have it, there are still many, many things we can do in order to strengthen our joint cause.
We thank you all very much. Thank you, Gilad, and good luck. Until 2 weeks from now on Monday. Shalom to you all.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.